Harry never knew travelling by night bus could be so raucous. The triple-decker's violent swerves and sudden stops had already sent him tumbling from one seat to another, each jolt making his stomach lurch. He held onto the back of a shabby armchair with white knuckles, his trunk sliding precariously across the floor whenever the driver, named Ernie, as the conductor Stan kept reminding him, took an especially sharp turn. He couldn't help laughing at the absurdity of it all, though his nerves were wound tight. What other choice did he have? He'd only just escaped the Dursleys in the original timeline, but now, under Aberforth's guardianship, it was different. They had parted ways in Hogsmeade with a brusque nod and a gruff, "Don't get yourself killed" from Aberforth. Harry was used to that. He also knew that his presence on the night bus was partly a matter of caution. Dementors, they said, were scouring the countryside for Sirius Black, the escaped prisoner who people thought was out to kill him. He was turning 13, yet he felt far older. Events in his first and second years had forced him to face things he might have been shielded from otherwise. Fighting a possessed defense against the dark arts teacher, discovering that Voldemort's spirit lurked behind that mild facade, and then descending into the Chamber of Secrets last year to fight a basilisk, had stripped away any illusions about a safe, gentle world. He had grown up in the Hog's Head, not some cozy suburban house. Danger was never a stranger. Still, there was a tension buzzing in his chest that he couldn't shake. Albus Dumbledore's sister Ariana, her tragic death, and Aberforth's bitterness had given Harry a new lens. He saw the wizarding world's great heroes, including Albus, with a skepticism that sometimes verged on anger. Harry might have forgiven Albus's failings if they were remote, but Ariana's story was not remote. It was family, in a sense, and that complicated everything. The night bus screeched to a halt outside the leaky cauldron, tossing Harry forward into a half somersault. Stan, the conductor, flashed him a grin that revealed a missing front tooth and said, "Error we are, then." He offered to carry Harry's trunk, but Harry insisted he could manage. Within minutes, the young wizard found himself standing in the quiet nighttime atmosphere of Diagon Alley, pulling his trunk behind him. The flickering torches cast shadows on the cobblestones, making the usually vibrant shops look eerie. Harry had arranged to spend a few nights in the leaky cauldron before the school year started. Aberforth was busy dealing with some unexpected complication at the Hog's Head, likely a goat gone rogue or trouble with a new shipment of mead, and he and Harry had agreed that it'd be best if Harry arrived at King's Cross from London, like most students. Or maybe Aberforth just wanted to ensure Harry got a taste of independence, to see the wizarding world from a vantage other than the dusty bar he'd always known. While he settled into a small, slightly musty room at the leaky cauldron, his mind drifted to the rumour that Sirius Black was coming after him. He'd gleaned a few details from overhearing witches and wizards chat at the inn. Black was said to be a devoted follower of Voldemort, a dangerous convict who'd broken out of Azkaban in a way no one had ever managed before. But Harry couldn't fathom why the man would be after him. Still, if Albus or the Ministry had deemed it necessary to post Dementors all around, it had to be serious. Dementors, he had only read about them in passing. Creatures that guarded Azkaban, feed on human happiness, and can force a person to relive their worst memories. The thought made his stomach twist, a sensation of dread creeping over him. He knew his worst memories were not the same as many other children's. Watching his parents die was a horrifying image, but so were the fleeting recollections of the chamber, the echo of Tom Riddle's voice, and the face of Ariana in an old photograph Aberforth had once shown him. He feared the Dementors could dredge up those half-formed nightmares and twist them into something that would shatter him. Thankfully, the days passed without incident. Harry practiced small spells in his room and occasionally strolled Diagon Alley for supplies. He felt a pang of longing for the Hog's Head more than he expected, missing the goats and the comforting grumble of Aberforth's presence. Even so, he was glad for the freedom. He bumped into Ron and Hermione on his second day. They'd arrived with their families. Hermione's parents, kindly but wide-eyed at the wizarding world, offered Harry a warm greeting. Ron's parents likewise fussed over him, though they gave each other uneasy looks whenever Sirius Black was mentioned. That night, Harry found it hard to sleep, thinking about how much the Weasley parents seemed to worry for him. They didn't know he was used to looking after himself. He remembered the time last year when he had to face the basilisk on his own while teachers floundered. It had reinforced his belief that the grown-ups around him especially Albus Dumbledore, were not always going to come rushing in to save him. Part of him resented it, part of him took pride in his independence. On the morning of September 1st, Harry travelled with Ron and Hermione to King's Cross Station. They found platform 9 3/4 bustling with the usual crowd of witches, wizards, and bickering families. Amid the swirl of noise, Mrs. Weasley crushed Harry in a motherly hug, whispering, "Be safe, dear." He saw the flicker of real worry in her eyes, and it touched him. Though he simply gave a brave grin, he was used to offering reassurance. The three friends boarded the Hogwarts Express, searching for an empty compartment. It was more crowded than usual, with many people who seemed on edge. Dementor sightings on the outskirts of wizarding towns had everyone jumpy. Eventually, they found a compartment at the very end of the train, one occupant slumbering in the corner, a shabby, prematurely greying man with scuffed shoes and patched robes. Ron stowed his trunk overhead, Hermione kept glancing at the sleeping stranger, and Harry silently noted a battered briefcase on the seat next to him, with R.G. Lupin etched into the corner. He recognized the name from the staff list in his Hogwarts letter. That explained it. So they had a new defense against the dark arts teacher, a man who appeared more exhausted than terrifying. Relief filled Harry. He'd had enough of pompous or malicious DDA instructors. Maybe this year they'd have someone actually capable of preparing them against the threats lurking in the wizarding world. But as the train lurched into motion, the lights flickering in the corridor, Harry felt the same swirl of uncertainty. Every year at Hogwarts, he ended up facing something that shook him to his core, and he wondered what form that challenge would take now. Halfway through the journey, the train ground to an unexpected halt, lights dimming as though someone had cut the power. Hermione lifted her head from the book she was reading, eyes wide. Ron peered out the window into darkness. "Why are we stopping?" The question hung in the gloom. Suddenly the temperature plummeted, and Harry's breath came out in a visible mist. A wave of cold dread washed over him, making his heart pound. All the warmth inside him seemed to evaporate. He heard the sound of the compartment door sliding open, and he turned to see a towering, cloaked figure gliding in. A Dementor. The creature's presence was overwhelming. Harry felt an immediate plunge into memory, the echo of a scream, and images of the Chamber of Secrets flickering like strobe lights in his mind. Fear coiled, suffocating him. He didn't even notice Lupin rise from his seat, wand in hand. A blinding silver-white light erupted from Lupin's wand, driving the Dementor back. Harry only came to himself when he hit the compartment floor, eyes squeezed shut, cold sweat beading on his forehead. He heard Hermione calling his name, her voice shaky. Ron hovered over him, shouting, "Harry, mate, wake up!" The creeping terror receded, though not completely. Lupin murmured a few words of comfort, offering Harry a piece of chocolate. Dazed, Harry took it, biting down on the sweet with trembling lips, grateful for the faint wave of warmth it brought. Lupin introduced himself softly, ensuring they were all right. Harry stared at the new professor, chest still tight. He had never felt so vulnerable, not even in the chamber. He realized with horror that the Dementor had dredged up a swirl of painful images. A flash of green light from the night his parents died, Ariana's pale face in a photograph, Aberforth's tearful regret, and worse, Voldemort's laughter echoing. Harry sensed that Lupin had glimpsed something in his reaction, a deeper pain than most 13-year-olds carried. Though Lupin said nothing further, he gave Harry a look of profound understanding. The train eventually resumed its journey, but a sobering hush had fallen over everyone. Hermione kept glancing at Harry, her eyes full of concern. Ron tried to crack a few jokes, but no one laughed. Harry was just thankful the Dementor was gone. He felt an odd mix of humiliation and relief. The fact that the creature had such power over him, despite everything he'd faced, was deeply unsettling. As they arrived at Hogsmeade Station and stepped onto the platform, the presence of more Dementors hovering near the carriages only deepened his sense of unease. In the distance, the warm lights of Hogwarts beckoned, but the newly arrived threat cast a chill over the familiar turrets and towers. The first night back at Hogwarts was usually marked by a feast of celebration, but the atmosphere this year was muted. Students whispered about Sirius Black and Dementors. Professor Dumbledore gave a solemn speech, explaining that the Dementors were stationed around the school for everyone's safety. Harry, sitting between Hermione and Ron at the Gryffindor table, kept his gaze on his plate. He remembered Ariana and a flame of resentment flickered in his chest. Dumbledore was so quick to speak of safety and the precautions being taken, yet Harry recalled how slow the headmaster had been to intervene with the basilisk situation, or to warn them. Now Dementors roamed, terrorizing the students, and Albus seemed content to let them linger. Harry ate little, fighting the swirl of negative emotions. When the feast concluded, he avoided Dumbledore's eyes, ignoring the gentle smile he felt directed at him. Over the next few days, classes began in earnest. Ron and Hermione compared schedules and bickered about the best way to handle the new workload, especially with Hermione's baffling number of classes. Meanwhile, rumors about Sirius Black ignited the school's gossip circuits. Some speculated he was out to avenge Voldemort. Others thought he wanted to capture Harry for some twisted reason. All Harry knew was that the Dementor's presence affected him far worse than most students. He'd freeze, his scar prickling, and feel that plunging despair. More than once, he had to steady himself against a wall, heart pounding painfully in his chest as a Dementor floated by. Professor Lupin quickly earned a reputation as one of the best defense teachers in recent memory. His calm, understanding nature and practical lessons on dark creatures captivated the students. He introduced them to a boggart that took the shape of each person's greatest fear. For Harry, it took the shape of a Dementor, its hooded form gliding ominously forward. The moment he saw it, he felt that same suffocating dread, echoing screams, the sense of helplessness. Lupin intervened before Harry lost consciousness, stepping forward to banish the boggart. It was a small mercy, but Harry felt humiliated all over again, singled out by his vulnerability to those horrors. After class, Lupin pulled Harry aside, gently asking if he would like some extra help learning to ward off Dementors. Harry, though proud, wanted desperately to overcome the terror, so he nodded. He told Ron and Hermione about the arrangement later while they lounged in the Gryffindor common room, and both friends encouraged him. But it wasn't just the Dementors that weighed on Harry's mind. It was Albus and the unspoken tension between them. Albus made occasional attempts to approach him after meals or in the corridors, but Harry always managed to slip away. He wasn't ready to face the conversation about Ariana, about old regrets. He was still too angry to see if there was any redemption for the headmaster's past decisions. The first Patronus lesson took place in an unused classroom on the 3rd floor. Desks were pushed to the sides, giving Harry and Lupin ample space to practice. Lupin had procured a small chest in which a boggart, capable of transforming into a Dementor, lurked. Harry's hands trembled slightly as he raised his wand, focusing on Lupin's soft-spoken instructions. "You need to summon a powerful, positive memory," Lupin explained. "It has to be an image or thought that fills you with hope and happiness. Then you say, 'Expecto Patronum.'" He demonstrated the incantation, though no actual Patronus emerged. He was saving his magic to subdue the boggart, if necessary. Harry closed his eyes, rummaging through his memories. He thought of the day he'd made his first friend, or the thrill of flying on a broom, but there was a stronger one. That time in the Hog's Head, when Aberforth had let him milk a goat for the first time as a young child, praising him with a rare smile, or the time he'd come back from his first year at Hogwarts to find Aberforth had cleared a small shelf just for Harry's schoolbooks, as if it was a quiet acknowledgement that Harry truly had a place there. He latched onto that moment. Slowly he opened his eyes and spoke. "Expecto Patronum," voice shaky. A wisp of silver vapor emerged from his wand, but it faded almost immediately. Lupin gave him an encouraging nod. "That's a start. Try again." The professor opened the chest, and the boggart emerged, instantly twisting into the shape of a Dementor. Harry's breath caught. He forced himself to recall the warmth of Aberforth's acceptance. He shouted, "Expecto Patronum!" A thin stream of silvery light burst forth, more substantial this time, but nowhere near enough to repel the phantom. Lupin, quick on the draw, intervened with his own Patronus, a silvery wolf that scattered the boggart. Harry sank to his knees, panting. Lupin knelt beside him, a hand on his shoulder. "You've got the spark," he said. "We just need to build it. It takes practice." Harry swallowed hard, nodding, determined not to give up. The lessons continued, each session pushing Harry closer to conjuring a proper Patronus. He tried different memories. His first Quidditch win, a silly memory of a birthday spent at the Hog's Head, where Aberforth had actually made him a lopsided cake. But something always held him back. A swirl of guilt and anger whenever Albus's face intruded upon his thoughts. or Ariana's half-remembered portrait. It was as if he couldn't fully commit to joy because part of him was weighed down by unresolved emotions. Lupin noticed Harry's struggle. One evening, as the Boggart Dementor hovered menacingly in front of them, Lupin gently lowered his wand, stepping out of the confrontation pose. "Harry," he said quietly, "sometimes we can't hold on to our happiest memories if we're consumed by a different kind of pain. You know I'm here if you want to talk. It might help." Harry hesitated, then found himself recounting some of Ariana's story, the bitterness he felt toward Albus, how he saw the headmaster as partly responsible for letting tragedy unfold. Lupin listened intently, eyes reflecting empathy rather than shock. When Harry finished, Lupin nodded gravely. "Albus's past is complicated. That's not to excuse him, just to acknowledge that I understand your feelings. It might be weighing you down, making you feel like joy is fragile or uncertain." Harry let out a shaky breath. He recognized something in Lupin's tone. Perhaps the professor had his own regrets, his own sense of being wronged or misunderstood by the world. Though Lupin didn't elaborate, the unspoken parallel comforted Harry slightly. He agreed then to see if he could find a path to some resolution with Albus. It wasn't a promise to forgive, just a step toward clarity. Meanwhile, the Dementors stationed around Hogwarts showed no signs of leaving. Students were tense, complaining of nightmares and bouts of hopelessness. Ron, Hermione, and Harry often found themselves gathered in the common room after curfew, discussing the newest hints about Sirius Black's whereabouts. Hermione pointed out that Black was rumored to have been James Potter's friend. Ron found that impossible to believe, but Hermione was thorough, citing wizarding journals and old newspaper clippings. "He was their secret keeper, apparently, and he betrayed them," she said softly, scanning Harry's face. Harry didn't know how to respond. The idea that this man, presumably a friend of his father, had handed James and Lily to Voldemort was beyond horrifying. Worse, if Albus had known all this, if all the teachers knew. Why was Harry always the last to find out? That bitterness flared anew. A few weeks into term, the Gryffindor Quidditch team faced Slytherin in a match overshadowed by looming Dementors. The sky was iron grey, rain pouring down in sheets that rattled on the stands. Harry felt his firebolt, anonymously gifted, though he had suspicions it was from Aberforth or maybe some well-wisher, tremble in his grip. The match started, and the wind whipped so fiercely it was hard to see. He soared high, scanning for the snitch, when the world seemed to lurch. Dementors circled below, drawn by the swirl of human emotion. Harry felt the icy dread pierce him. His scar burned. The memory of a scream echoed in his mind. Was it Ariana's or his mother's? He couldn't tell. Everything turned black. He lost control of his broom, plummeting, only to be saved at the last second by the combined efforts of Dumbledore and several staff members, their wands raised. Even so, he crashed painfully onto the muddy pitch. He lay there, stunned, the stadium spinning around him. When he blinked his eyes open, Albus Dumbledore was crouched beside him, face etched with concern. Harry wanted to recoil, but he was too disoriented to move. Albus whispered, "You're safe now, Harry." But Harry's heart hammered, unsure he believed it. He spent the night in the hospital wing, awakened occasionally by Madame Pomfrey's fussing. The next morning, Albus arrived with a small hamper of sweets from Honeydukes, setting them on the bedside table. He tried to ask how Harry was doing, but Harry stared at his hands, fists balled in the sheets, refusing to meet the old wizard's gaze. Finally, Albus cleared his throat. "I understand your hesitation," he said softly, "but I hope you know I never want you harmed." There was a trembling sincerity in his voice. Harry felt a surge of conflicting emotions, anger, sadness, a longing for clarity. He remembered Ariana, Aberforth's tears that night in the back room of the Hog's Head, but he said nothing. Albus left, and the tension in Harry's chest remained. That evening, after Harry was discharged, he went to Lupin for another Patronus lesson. He arrived early, pacing outside the classroom. At last, Lupin opened the door, a concerned expression on his tired face. "Harry, are you sure you're up for this right now?" Harry nodded, taking a shaky breath. "I have to do it. I can't let the Dementors have this hold on me." Lupin nodded in approval. When the Boggart emerged as a Dementor, Harry felt the usual wave of terror, but he closed his eyes, searching for a memory strong enough to push away the darkness. This time, he pictured himself standing in the Hogshead yard when he was barely 5, Aberforth teaching him to coax a goat closer with gentle words and an outstretched handful of feed. He recalled the glow of sunset on the mountains, the sense that he was safe and loved, even if in a gruff, unspoken way. He gritted his teeth, raised his wand, and roared, "Expecto Patronum!" A brilliant silver shape leapt out, bright as a bolt of lightning. For a moment, Harry thought he saw the outline of an animal, something slender, agile, and quick. The Dementor Boggart recoiled, drifting backward, until Lupin swiftly banished it. Harry collapsed to his knees, breathing hard but triumphant. The wave of relief that followed nearly made him dizzy. He looked up, meeting Lupin's eyes. The professor smiled, warm and encouraging, and Harry felt the stirrings of genuine pride. For the first time since the year began. He didn't master the spell overnight. There were more lessons, more attempts, some unsuccessful, but each time he summoned the memory of simpler days at the Hogshead, feeling Aberforth's rough love, or the unwavering loyalty of Ron and Hermione. The Patronus grew stronger. It moved with a life of its own, a shimmering guardian of silver, though fleeting. Lupin explained that in time it would stabilize into a distinct animal form, unique to Harry's spirit. Harry wondered if it might be a goat in some cosmic irony, but he sensed it would be something else. Something capturing his readiness to defend, his loyalty, his hidden grace. He couldn't be sure yet. Meanwhile, life carried on. The rumour mill churned out stories about Sirius Black. Students claimed he'd been spotted near Hogsmeade, or that he'd broken into the castle. There was an unsettling moment during a Gryffindor portrait search, the fat lady's painting shredded by some unknown intruder. Dumbledore's grim face when he surveyed the damage suggested he suspected Sirius. Harry, however, felt flickers of doubt. Why would Black be so desperate to get into Gryffindor Tower, specifically, and how was he evading the Dementors if he was truly on the run? One Saturday, Harry ventured down to Hogsmeade, under an invisibility cloak, courtesy of a marauder's map that he, Ron, and Hermione had discovered. He felt slightly guilty, but his curiosity burned. The sight of the familiar street awakened a longing in him. He wanted to dart down the alley that led to the Hogshead, to see Aberforth's grumpy face. But that would only reveal he was sneaking around. Instead, he roamed the main streets, ducking into Zonko's joke shop and eavesdropping on witches who gossiped about Sirius. He overheard one mention he was best friends with James Potter, but he turned traitor. Anger sparked in Harry's chest. If that was true, if Black had indeed betrayed his father, Harry felt he had the right to face him, ask him why, but he also sensed a pang of sorrow. The idea that James had once trusted Sirius, only to be handed over to Voldemort, mirrored the sorrow that Albus must have felt after Ariana died, trusting the wrong people or losing track of what mattered most. The connection made Harry uneasy. He didn't want to find common ground with Albus. He wasn't ready. When Christmas approached, the castle was draped in icy winds, but the holiday cheer did its best to push away the Dementors' chill. Harry found that the nights in the Gryffindor common room, chatting with Ron and Hermione near the fire, brought him more peace than he'd experienced all term. The three of them teased each other about gifts they might receive. Hermione kept nudging them to study for next term's classes. Her grandfather nudged her and gave them her knitting. In 2010, Harry kept receiving postcards from London. Ron rolled his eyes, while Harry half listened, his thoughts drifting to how good it felt to be warm and safe, if only for an evening. He received an unexpected gift, a hand-nailed scarf and some honey fudge from Aberforth, accompanied by a terse note that read, "Don't let those robed nightmares spook you." Harry smiled. He could almost hear the old man's voice in each word, that fatherly concern cloaked in gruffness. The real confrontation came in mid-January, when Harry, returning from a late-night Patronus lesson with Lupin, ran right into Albus Dumbledore at the entrance hall. The headmaster was alone, gazing out at the grounds bathed in moonlight. He turned when he heard footsteps. Harry froze, unsure whether to bolt or speak. Albus, however, gave him a gentle nod. "Walking the halls late, are we?" he asked. Harry managed a tight nod. "Lupin's training session?" Albus smiled faintly. "I'm glad to see you taking that step. The Patronus is powerful magic, especially for someone who has faced so much darkness." Harry, swallowing the knot in his throat, forced himself to meet Albus's eyes. A swirl of questions rose. Why didn't you help Ariana? Why let Dementors swarm the school if you knew how dangerous they were? Why couldn't you have warned me about Sirius Black or told me about my parents' friends? His anger roiled. But something in Albus's expression, an unguarded weariness, softened Harry's edge. He recalled Lupin's words about how unresolved pain could weigh you down. Finally he spoke, voice tight but sincere. Professor, I need to know why you let bad things happen when you could have stopped them. Albus's face flickered with emotion. He glanced away, leaning on his staff. After a heavy moment, he said, Sometimes, Harry, we believe we can save everyone if we see far enough, plan carefully enough. But I was wrong. I've been wrong before, and Ariana paid the price. You've every right to be angry with me. Hearing Ariana's name from Albus's own lips cracked something inside Harry. He realized that for all the bitterness, he had never truly confronted Albus about it directly. Now, the words tumbled out. Aberforth told me what happened, that you and Grindelwald had plans, that Ariana got left behind, and you're doing it again, aren't you? Always planning, letting us walk into danger if it suits your grand design. His voice rang in the empty hall. Albus's shoulders sagged. I do have plans, he admitted, but not all revolve around letting you face danger. I hoped to protect you, but I also know that the path of a prophecy, that the path of certain destinies, can't be run from. I've tried to give you room to become who you must. And yes, I live with my regrets every day. The candlelit corridor felt stifling. Harry's anger wavered, replaced by confusion and a tinge of sympathy he didn't want to feel. You owe Aberforth an apology, he said, though he knew that apology might never be fully accepted. Albus nodded. I owe many apologies, but I do what I can to keep you safe, even if I can't always show it. Then he turned, his robe sweeping across the floor, leaving Harry alone to grapple with feelings too tangled to unwind in a single night. The second half of the year brought fresh chaos. Sirius Black was spotted within Hogwarts, rumored to have slashed at the fat lady's portrait again. Tension soared. Ron swore he saw a large black dog near his bedside one night. Hermione seemed exhausted, juggling classes and looking more worried by the day. Harry, meanwhile, continued his Patronus training, each success a step toward resisting the Dementors. He found that thinking of the Hog's Head, his weird, messy home, was the memory that worked best. One cold evening, Lupin finally told him, "That's enough practice for tonight," after Harry produced a shining stag of silver that galloped across the classroom before dissipating into mist. Harry caught his breath, stunned by the majestic form. Lupin smiled warmly. "Your father's Patronus was a stag too," he said gently, and for once Harry felt more pride than grief, a sense that maybe his father was still with him in some way. The final confrontation came near the end of term, when Ron's pet rat went missing, and an unfortunate chain of events revealed the rat was actually Peter Pettigrew in animagus form, James Potter's old friend who had betrayed the family to Voldemort. This all came out during a frantic chase to the Shrieking Shack, involving Sirius Black, who turned out to be innocent of betrayal, and Remus Lupin, who was a werewolf. The swirl of confusion nearly overwhelmed Harry, but in the end he stood face to face with Sirius, the man the world believed was a deranged killer. Sirius's haunted eyes fixed on Harry with a mixture of desperation and longing. "You look so much like James," Sirius murmured. "I'm sorry for everything." Pettigrew was cowering, wide-eyed, trying to wriggle free. The truth, that Pettigrew had framed Sirius, burned like a brand in Harry's mind. It turned his worldview upside down. It also made him realize how often illusions and half-truths had shaped his life, how many times he'd been left in the dark by well-meaning authorities. When Pettigrew escaped that night, leading to Sirius's despair, Harry felt a surge of fierce resolve. He knew the Ministry wouldn't listen to reason, not without proof. Dementors would be unleashed on Sirius without hesitation. In that final confrontation, a horde of Dementors closed in near the lake, threatening to deliver the kiss to Sirius. In that critical moment, Harry tapped into the warmth of everything he held dear, the fleeting glimpses of his parents' love, yes, but also Aberforth's rough kindness, Ron and Hermione's unwavering friendship, and the knowledge that, in his own way, Albus was trying to protect him, even if it was flawed. He raised his wand, shouted, "Expecto Patronum!" and a blinding silver stag erupted, charging at the Dementors with unstoppable force. Harry staggered, but his Patronus drove them back, scattering the vicious swarm. He collapsed to his knees, panting. The Patronus shimmered for several seconds before fading. Sirius was saved, though it was only a brief reprieve. He was still a hunted fugitive. That night ended in a flurry of confusion, rescue, and heartbreak. With Hermione's help and a device that bent time itself, Harry managed to free Sirius from captivity on a tower, letting him escape on the back of a hippogriff. Though they had saved an innocent man from a terrible fate, the victory felt bittersweet. Pettigrew was free, and Sirius remained an outlaw. In the aftermath, Harry sat on the side steps of the castle, looking out over the grounds that were momentarily calm. The Dementors were being withdrawn. Dumbledore had concluded that the risk was no longer justifiable, thanks to their aggression and the new revelations. Harry felt the tension in his chest begin to loosen. Albus stepped out from one of the castle's side doors. Harry noticed him approach, but stayed where he was. He looked up as the headmaster sat beside him on the stone step, the old man's robes pooling around him. They stayed silent a long time. Finally, Albus said, "I'm sorry, Harry. I know you have lost faith in me." Harry inhaled slowly. "It's not about faith, it's about trust. You let Ariana slip away. You let me face things that might have broken me." Albus's eyes were heavy with sadness. "And yet you emerged stronger. That is both a blessing and a burden on my conscience." They exchanged a glance that felt raw, unguarded. After a few more moments, Albus continued. "Aberforth raised you with more wisdom than I ever gave him credit for. He taught you to see through illusions. I suppose that's why you are so aware of my flaws." Harry nodded. "Maybe, but you need to be honest with me if you want me to trust you." The headmaster exhaled, nodding slowly. "I'll try," he said quietly. "I truly will." It wasn't an instant reconciliation, nor a neat tie-up of every loose end. Harry still felt the sting of Ariana's fate whenever he looked at Albus. He knew Aberforth would never quite see eye to eye with his brother. And yet, as the term ended and the Hogwarts Express prepared to take them home, Harry felt a cautious sense of possibility. He had discovered a deep reservoir of strength within himself. His Patronus, a glowing stag that linked him to his father and to the best of who he was. He had learnt that the adult world was riddled with half-truths and regrets, but that didn't doom him to cynicism. He could carve a path that honoured the lessons he'd learned at the Hog's Head: loyalty, action, and clear-eyed honesty. Ron and Hermione walked beside him onto the train, chattering about next year's electives and the summer ahead. Hermione teased Harry that he would be practicing Patronus spells for fun now that he'd mastered them. Ron made a face, joking that he'd much rather be practicing Quidditch. They stowed their trunks, settling into a compartment with relief. "It's been a mad year, even by our standards," Ron declared, collapsing onto a seat. Hermione nodded, rubbing her temples. "At least it ended on a, well, maybe not a high note, but not catastrophic." Harry grinned wryly. "We've got to take what we can get." Gazing out the window as the train pulled away from the station, Harry let the swirl of shifting emotions settle in his mind. The relief of saving Sirius, the frustration of losing Pettigrew, the pride of conjuring a full Patronus, and the lingering tension with Albus that might not fully heal anytime soon. But for the first time, he felt he had the tools and the support to walk the tightrope between cynicism and hope. He'd stand tall, a Patronus at the ready in his heart, facing whatever darkness came next. When they arrived back at King's Cross, the hustle of Muggle London was a jarring contrast to the wizarding drama they'd left behind. Harry stepped off the train, hugging Hermione and shaking Ron's hand, making vague plans to right each other. He couldn't help but notice a familiar figure in the crowd, Aberforth, leaning against a pillar, trying not to draw attention to himself, in his threadbare overcoat that looked decidedly out of place in the Muggle station. Harry felt a rush of gratitude and something like joy. He made his way over and Aberforth straightened, giving him an appraising look. "Heard you held your own again," he said brusquely. "Managed to avoid letting those Dementors suck out your soul." Harry nodded. "Had help," he murmured. Aberforth gave a gruff snort. "You always do, lad. Doesn't mean you're not strong." They walked together out of the station, the city's noise swirling around them. Harry's trunk rattled behind them, and a few passing people gave curious glances at the old man's goat-embroidered patch on his coat. But Harry didn't care. A sense of quiet satisfaction settled over him. He knew there would be new battles, new heartbreaks. He still carried bitterness about Ariana's fate and Albus's failings. Yet he also carried a glimmer of trust. Trust in himself, in the loyalty of his friends, and in the luminous promise of his Patronus. Whatever else, he was not alone, and that was enough for now. In the weeks that followed, he returned to his odd but welcoming life at the Hog's Head, helping Aberforth haul crates and feed goats, practicing defensive spells in the yard whenever the bar was closed. He wrote occasionally to Albus, short, stilted notes, but at least it was communication. Albus responded with updates on the school's restoration after the Dementor fiasco and well wishes for Harry's training. They were taking tentative steps towards some kind of understanding, one that might never erase the pain but could perhaps prevent further wounds. In the stillness of a late spring evening, Harry found himself gazing at the reflection of a goat in a water trough, remembering his shining silver stag, the day he truly conjured it in full. He wondered if one day he'd see it again, in a real crisis. Galloping forth like a guardian spirit, his chest warmed at the thought. With the Hog's Head behind him and the sky wide open above, Harry believed, just for a moment, that he could face any darkness that came his way.